The exaggerated resolve of a Japanese samurai. As I blazed through the beautiful environments of 2019's Ghost of Tsushima on PS4, I completely began to understand why it all felt so familiar. Certainly, there is no doubt that the biggest influence on the game might be the Assassin's Creed franchise, with the well-crafted levels that challenge stealth problem solving, as well as the more open and flowing combat system. A combat system that might not be as easy as, say, the Batman Arkham games, with more challenge and timing emphasized. Perhaps it could also be heavily compared to the Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption games, with their ambitious open-world environments, horseback riding vistas, and variety of side quests. Of course, another comparison to Ghost of Tsushima one could make is also having similar aesthetics, movement, and combat controls to Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, another challenging, samurai-themed action-adventure game, but from the developer From Software. Sucker Punch Productions' Ghost of Tsushima, though, for some odd reason, does not really remind me much of these other games, not nearly as much as it reminds me of The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. 2017's Zelda Breath of the Wild did something. It set an environmental standard for video games that we are seeing quickly influencing the feel and detail of environments in other newer games. In many ways, I see Ghost of Tsushima as PlayStation's answer to Nintendo's Breath of the Wild. Or at the very least, the inspiration and influence that Breath of the Wild has given to other developers has led to the further refinements and additions to what I would call a new standard in open worlds. So, perhaps you might be wondering, why would Breath of the Wild feel more like Ghost of Tsushima than Red Dead 2 or Assassin's Creed? Well, it's really because I feel like Sucker Punch understands what Breath of the Wild did so right. Create an open world that feels diverse and engaging to get lost in, with fairly quick immediacy to the entire map being available to explore early on as well. Full rock formations to climb, small and large towns to explore, unique challenges scattered around the vast forests and wastelands. Early on in Breath of the Wild, after you've familiarized yourself with the basic controls, your immediate focus is placed on, well, the environment. Because really, that is where most of the game is spent, in the vast wilderness of a dedicated Hyrule, withered away by malevolence at the heart of its kingdom. The environment in Breath of the Wild is incredibly present, as even before you're able to freely explore the map and make an attempt to stop Ganon, in the smaller area you're initially locked into, you experience challenging weather and temperature conditions that pose risks to Link. While there have been environmental threats to Link before in previous Zelda games, in Breath of the Wild it's far more casually introduced, almost as if it's an organic condition without any need for a direct in-game warning. The desire to make the Zelda experience feel more organic for the player really helps in terms of how the maneuverability of Link comes into play. Not only can Link now freely jump around in what feels like a franchise first, he also feels incredibly agile and limber in general. Gone are the awkward jumps of Ocarina of Time, and in is a more controlled and refined sense of agility for the player character. Yet still, Link carries his distinct sense of weight and feel quite naturally from his previous titles. Even though there was quite a bit of climbing in Skyward Sword, it pales in comparison to the amount and variety of terrain to maneuver in Breath of the Wild. In doing this, allowing just about any object or environment feature to be climbed and conquered, there's an immediate extended invitation to discover the nooks and crannies of the vast overworld map. The various details and puzzles littered throughout the map would not be much fun to collect or solve if the path between these objects was not engaging, and it certainly is here. Eiji Aonuma's last console effort, Zelda Skyward Sword, featured environments that were tighter and more confined, but with the distinct intent of making them their own kind of dungeons. Fundamentally, this meant that the overworld that connected these dungeon-like zones was a vast, clouded wasteland that did not exactly inspire much in the way of exploration. I actually really like Skyward Sword, by the way, just for the record, but really the decision to make the larger map of Breath of the Wild was all the better for it. Sure, one might say that the more direct, dungeon-esque level designs of Skyward Sword made for a more streamlined but interesting adventure. And in some ways that's true, but the sense of movement and discovery in Skyward Sword does not really capture or move me as much as the vast, spread-out landscape of Breath of the Wild. Truly a map that embraces scale and size, while not skimping out on a dynamic variety of details and challenges, constantly evolving and expanding. Really, in a certain sense, Breath of the Wild is a true spiritual successor to the original Legend of Zelda on the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, a game that drops the player in the world with little to no information and is quickly given an ominous message and direction from an old man with a beard, and a huge, wide open map for the player to explore, with many secrets, puzzles, and dungeons to challenge along the way. Of course, it's more spiritual and from a macro level, because also, Breath of the Wild stands out quite a bit from the NES Zelda when it gets to the micro level. The amount of depth, detail, narrative, large and small, hidden items and rewards to find, it's absolutely massive in terms of things to discover, and many agree that even casual returns to a long completed save file render new things to find and do. I often like looking at how greatly the completionist had a hard time fully completing this game, almost purely due to the amount of Korok seeds alone to collect.
Guess what happens when you get 100%? Survey says nothing!
In this way, Breath of the Wild, through its environment, means to have a long shelf life. Much in the same way that Red Dead Redemption 2 has vast dynamic environments with quests and objectives, Breath of the Wild pursues a sense of journey that comes from exploring a vast wilderness as well, taming and dealing with differing forms of wildlife, crafting resources from the environment, discovering the necessary routes and passages to find valuable tools. Breath of the Wild is jam-packed with content. Many specific missions from Breath of the Wild are indicative of previous Zelda titles, providing clever and explicit homage every now and then. While many other missions are completely unique for the Zelda franchise, whether they be totally ingenious puzzling shrines, or side quests to discover slow-moving, mysterious sky dragons. It's in this way that Nintendo has managed to craft a Zelda experience that acknowledges its series past while refining the best parts of said past games, all the while creating new and bold mechanics and level designs to keep players consistently pleased. Sure, there are some who criticize Breath of the Wild for its seemingly lackluster dungeons, especially in comparison to the quality dungeons from previous Zelda games, but I believe these dungeons to not only be fine, but feel more like they're connected to the world, these large, kaiju-like totemic powerhouses that they are. I do understand that the Zelda games have some fantastic high-bar level designs to match, but I think that Breath of the Wild survives it. I think that it might just be the best Zelda game there is, not even just a new standard for open worlds. It truly delivered the seismic addition to the Zelda franchise that many fans were clamoring for, and being a Nintendo Switch launch title also made this one of the most successful open-world games. And again, it also helped set a distinct sense of appeal and style that others would like to imitate. In many ways, like its previous games, it continues a legacy of setting new bars for single-player video games. The Legend of Zelda lives on in the Breath of the Wild.